A possible curfew extension may be considered for some islands. Two alleged killers have their day in court, and the country seeks to obtain the right to ownership of junk canoe. Good evening, everyone. I'm Leah Cooper with your JCN News for this Friday, February 19th. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Pearl McMillan says that seeing a curfew extension on some islands is a possibility based on the current data on positive COVID-19 cases on each island. We learned as much from the Ministry of Health's press conference yesterday.
New Providence still contributes the greatest proportion to our overall COVID-19 burden. Specifically, over the past 28 days, the Bahamas has recorded 295 new cases. Of these, 222, or 75%, were localized to New Providence. Weekly averages for New Providence have been in the single digits since mid-November 2020. In the week starting the 7th of February 2021, this average spilled into the double digits at 11.3. This represents a 53% increase over the prior week.
Now, earlier this week, Prime Minister Dr. Hubert Minnis extended the curfew for the island of Grand Bahama from 10 p.m. to 11 p.m. Currently, New Providence, Abaco, excluding Green Turtle Key, Grand Key, Man-o-War Key, and Elbow Key, Eleuthera, and Exuma have 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. curfews. According to the CMO, despite Grand Bahama and New Providence averaging a new case almost daily, most islands have contributed to flattening the curve. She also added that New Providence remains the main island that contributes to a majority of positive COVID-19 cases in country.
The Ministry of Health, through its contact tracing officers, has identified 4 distinct clusters of COVID-19 cases, which have emerged within the last 10 to 14 days. The cases associated with these clusters account for nearly 30% of all new cases, i.e., that is 162 reported during the last 2 weeks. The schematic that you are looking at illustrates the clusters, which are linked to the islands of New Providence and Grand Bahama.
Ministry of Health officials revealing that behind a recent uptick in COVID-19 cases in country, specifically New Providence and Grand Bahama, Chief Medical Officer Dr. Pearl McMillan, while announcing that the COVID-19 mitigation strategies and collective efforts of the public have paid off as we see downward trends in cases throughout the country, is urging Bahamians to remain vigilant and to not let their guards down as both Grand Bahama and Nassau continue to have new cases almost daily.
Certainly, the graphs that were shown suggest that, we may be in a position to begin to consider it. But we will continue to monitor what is happening on those islands and make recommendations to the competent authority along the lines of what we should, what could be considered. I will not suggest that this will happen, those curfews will be released as of tomorrow, but we continue to monitor them, and the graphs, as were shown, suggest that we may be in a position to do that going forward.
According to the CMO, for the entire Bahamas, the average weekly new cases stands at 14, and health officials are monitoring the situation on Andros, which is also experiencing an uptick in cases. The CMO says that Cluster A had 26 cases, Cluster B had 6 cases, and Cluster C had 7 cases, and Cluster D had 8 cases. Dr. McMillan is also urging Bahamians to not gather in groups of more than 20 and to continue social distancing. She also says that when wearing a mask, ensure that both your nose and mouths are covered. In the most recent update, health officials are reporting 16 newly confirmed COVID-19 cases, including 13 on New Providence, 1 on Grand Bahama, and 1 on Abaco, and 1 with the location pending, with only 1 of the newly confirmed cases having a history of travel. 12 of those new cases are females and 4 are males. The national total now stands at 8,419 confirmed cases, with 179 deaths attributed to COVID-19. There are currently 1,019 confirmed active cases. 17 cases are hospitalized, 14 of which are moderately ill, while 3 are in the intensive care unit. A total of 343 tests were conducted, with 325 negative results and 20 reported recoveries. The need for a joint tourism policy is urgent. That's what Prime Minister Dr. Hubert Minnis told CARICOM prime ministers and delegates during a virtual meeting yesterday. Dr. Minnis chaired the first meeting of the Prime Ministerial Subcommittee on Tourism to discuss the development of joint tourism policy for CARICOM. According to Dr. Minnis, the policy is aimed at addressing the urgent need to stimulate the recovery of the tourism industry over the coming months, while building on efforts already established to address the industry's longer-term growth, inclusiveness, and sustainability. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, fiscal revenues from the tourism industry have declined, leaving direct and indirect employment related to tourism. Dr. Minnis told regional prime ministers and delegates that the linkages, which are painstakingly forged between the tourism industry and other sectors and industries of other economies, have been severely disrupted. He added that while it has been previously acknowledged that diversities require nationally nuanced policies and strategies, it has reached a point where these approaches may be liabilities to respective tourism industries in CARICOM regions. The Prime Minister added that the joint tourism policy and its accompanying strategy for CARICOM are 2 critical tools that have to be added to Caribbean countries' response arsenal to path of survival, recovery, and sustainable development. The policy's vision, he says, is a CARICOM tourism that is sustainable, viable, of high quality, climate smart, resilient, and promotes empowerment and inclusiveness. The draft framework for the development of a joint tourism policy for CARICOM is expected to be submitted to the 32nd intersessional meeting of the heads of government, scheduled for the 23rd to 24th of this month. Leader of government business in the upper chamber this morning, Attorney General Senator Carl Bethel, tabled a number of bills read for the first time. The first was the Biological Resources and Traditional Knowledge Bill 2021, which was passed in the House of Assembly this week.
This bill will, for the first time in our history, provide a means to fully regulate the exploitation of genetic and biological information gleaned from the flora and fauna of the Bahamian ecosystem throughout our country, which has been utilized in the past by a bunch of cosmetic companies to make billions of dollars with not a cent coming to the Bahamian people. And so we are, this bill, when we get to it, and you will see that it is for the benefit of every Bahamian. Every Bahamian will benefit from the bill.
Senators are also expected to begin debate on the Court of Appeal Amendment Bill on Monday. This also coming from the AG, Carl Bethel, who says the legislation makes provisions for the appointment of an assistant registrar. You're watching JCN News. Stay with us.